So for more on this, I want to bring in Rebecca Walser. She is the president of Walser Wealth Management in Tampa, Florida. Hey, Rebecca, it's good to see you. So this is kind of interesting because, of course, the zero COVID policy really sort of put a damper on the Chinese economy and the possibility of growth. But lifting the policies has not been so great either, because we're seeing an explosion in cases there. So what is the expectation for the upcoming fourth quarter GDP report from China?
Well, yeah, exactly. Well, for the year, and we were expecting 3.2% GDP for the entire year of 2022. And that is their lowest, bar in 2020, of course, in decades. So that is extremely low. And it's certainly not the recovery. We got a recovery in 2010 of a 10% GDP. So after they got through kind of the the great financial crisis of 2008, 2009, they were really pulling the global GDP way far in advance. So 3.2 is very anemic, but like you say, very much due to their zero COVID policy that they did end on December 7th of last year. And so we're looking for this great, maybe we're putting too much, emphasis now on what can China do for the rest of the world. And you're right. I mean, to do this right in the winter when there's so many cases, Chinese New Year on Sunday, there's a lot of expectation that this will get worse before it gets better. So right when we get the momentum to start coming back to us for China, which we really need, it does have a huge impact on the U.S. We can talk about those numbers. Yeah. It looks like it is going to be stunted at best.
Okay, yeah, I do want to get to that. But I want to ask you, even here, we noticed that there are times when COVID restrictions were lifted, when people gathered, we expect a spike in cases, and then you get to the other side. So is there an expectation in China that, yes, it's going to be a rough few months, but China will then get to the other side and we will see we'll see an explosion of growth for the rest of the year, for 2023?
Well, they do have a lot of fundamentals working in their favor. Household savings are up 42% just since 2020. And China is different than the United States. We're a consumer-based nation. We don't save, we spend, and that is what creates our GDP. We're a consumption nation. They're a producer nation. So they're a saving nation. Their citizens save a lot, and that is really funding a lot of what the expansion of the economy does. So it is very important that they were able to bring their savings up substantially by 42%. That's massive. We're expecting that will allow consumers, once everything does reopen, to come back. We usually have about 3 million visitors from China to the United States on an annual basis. Last year, we only had 359,000. So we expect to go up to 1 million this year, but it's still far under what we were normally getting from the American-Chinese relationship. So it is important that they're reinvesting, the government's reinvesting back into real estate, which is 15% of their total overall GDP and economy. So we're seeing they're doing what they need to do. We need the government to stay committed to not going back to lockdowns. If they go back to lockdowns, Anne-Marie, we're going to be back into the same circular quagmire of never getting beyond coronavirus. And we must get beyond coronavirus.
So, Rebecca, a lot of people are going to hear the numbers. They get the idea that China's the second biggest economy in the world, and they know that that's significant. And you've given us some indication as to sort of some of the economic sort of connective tissue, if you will, between the U.S. and China. But can we talk a little bit more about why China being economically healthy is important for the rest of the world?
Yeah, I mean, because let's take Africa, for example, and Janet Yellen will be meeting with the vice premier this week in Switzerland. And, in 2018, China made a $60 billion investment commitment to Africa between grants, loans, all kinds of infrastructure charges. And the United States has a little bit of a concern with that because, in Janet Yellen's words, it's put the rest of us sort of in a defensive mode, how much investment they're placing into Africa. So we are sort of competing against them for global footprint. And if you look at what's happened with the BRICS nations, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and with Russia invading Ukraine last year, the BRICS nations have really, which have been in the works for 20 years, have really consolidated efforts this year to do all kinds of things. And I say this year, I mean 2022. And so the world is starting to see China take a very leading role economically, certainly in the Middle East, with Saudi Arabia, with the BRICS nations. And this is a huge concern from a defensive America saying, wait a minute, we're sort of the largest economy in the world. We're used to being the major player. And China has really made some massive strides along with Russia as almost their partner, which is alarming for the United States.
Rebecca Walser, thank you very much.
Thank you.